families, creating a lifetime of memories. Sadly, some families are denied these important moments due to the sad practice of alienation. These are families divided.
Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Families Divided. On this episode, Dr. Colleen Murray will be speaking with two alienated grandparents. They will share briefly their story and also give you some suggestions on how they cope with this hell on earth of alienation.
Hello, and welcome to our panel segment of Families Divided. Today, we'll be talking with two grandparents about their experience regarding being alienated from their grandchildren. Let us welcome Jeff Morgan and Elaine Simmonds. Hi, Jeff. How are you today?
Hi, Colleen. Thank you so much for having us on. Doing fine. Whenever you mention this topic, though, it does choke you up, doesn't it?
Yes. Absolutely. And I think as we get into it, the audience is really going to come to understand why that is. And welcome, Elaine. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Colleen. It's nice to be here. And I'm glad to share a little bit with the audience.
Well, thank you for joining us, both of you. So let's just jump right in and really dissect this. And let's look at, can you share with us, Jeff, just briefly, how is it that you became an alienated grandparent?
Yes, thank you very much. You know, the interesting thing was I never in my life ever would have anticipated this. I was watching my grandchildren a couple times, 3 times, sometimes up to 5 times a week. I was the babysitter. And it turned out that something happened with the Children's Protective Agency. They got called on my daughter because my daughter took my youngest grandson into the hospital. I was out of state, and somehow during this whole ordeal, I got blamed for it. I had no idea what was going on, and my daughter basically asked me a couple of questions, and I didn't even know what she was talking about. And at that point, I was adjudged guilty, as if I had somehow made this report. And the reason she was concerned is because in the past I had told her Children's Protective Services does not respond, does not act the way that you think. And she thought I was trying to kidnap the grandkids. Never in my life would I do that. And the interesting thing, Colleen, is that prior to that, my daughter was working. She was a single mom. And I'd be watching the grandkids. You know, if she was working a double shift, I'd take the grandkids down to her in between shifts, anything possible. But there was one time I remember that she had a babysitter. And the next time the grandchildren came over, I saw a bruise on my grandson's stomach. And I asked what it was. And I just, at that point, I didn't know who was babysitting, but I just said, I will always watch them. And my grandchildren and I had such a great relationship. They practically lived over here. They knew our house as if it was their own. My youngest grandson took his very first steps walking to me. I was like, Stephanie, look, there's Gideon, because Gideon's eyes got really big and it was just like, he's going to start to walk. And he took his very first steps to me. My other grandson, Cruz, no matter whose arms he was in, whenever he would see me, he'd just go wriggling out and just come running to me. And but this whole Children's Protective Services thing, this was a debacle. It was just something that never, ever should have happened. Government intrusion. And then I had a police report filed against me because of this false thing, this false report. And I ended up being sued by my daughter, my ex-wife, who got up on the stand, committed all sorts of perjury. I just could not believe the things that I had to go through. I could have lost my job. I could have been put in jail. And the reason was because when my youngest grandson was in the hospital, my wife went down to go see him. And had we just stayed away like everybody else, none of this would have happened. Anyway, so that's the way that it happened.
It sounds like you and your grandchildren had a very close relationship that was just torn apart over one false allegation. And I'm sure some people in our audiences are thinking, really? Just one? But I know from working in this field that is true, that, not everybody gets it right. We wish everybody would be like, the pilot they want to fly on the plane with, or the surgeon they want doing heart surgery on them. But not everybody is as diligent at their work. And so they think something some way and they just check a block on it and they move along, right?
Yeah, that's right. In fact, the lady who called me, she basically said that the reason she closed the case was because she knew that I and my wife were such a strong safety net to my grandchildren, but she refused to communicate that to my daughter. And when everything came against me, I begged her, I pleaded with her, please let them know. And she said, well, that's not my job. It's not my responsibility. I talked to her supervisor and she said, well, I don't really care about the family dynamics. I just love the children. And I thought, how is that? I'm the one who spent hundreds of hours, thousands of dollars on them. I'm there all the time. And you're going to tell me that you love my grandchildren, that you've never met more than I love them. It was the height of arrogance. And so I'll go into more what happened later on if the time permits.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that with us. So, Elaine, same question to you. How did alienation become part of your life?
Well, honestly, I don't know what happened. We had what we thought was a perfectly normal family relationship. We got along well with our son and our daughter-in-law, and we adored our grandchildren. When they were born, they were living in a different state from us. So we didn't get to see them all the time. I wish we had. And they did move back to our area. And we did spend a lot of time. We babysat. One day, my daughter's mother was at my house. We had a very good relationship. She was at my house and she looked at me and she said, don't ever cross my daughter. If you do, you'll never see your son and grandchildren again. And I was just floored by that comment. And I said to her, my son would never allow anything like that to happen. And she said, don't be too sure of that. And I was totally baffled. And then she went on to tell me that her daughter had alienated from she and her husband for about 13 months. And this all happened, I'm guessing, before my son and my daughter-in-law met, because they had been married about 5 years when my daughter-in-law's mother gave me all this information. She said during the time that they were alienated from their daughter, her mother had had major surgery, which she could have died from, and the daughter never responded to the calls or anything. She would not reply. And they were devastated. And then I think social media really gets involved in a lot of this, because my daughter-in-law in 2017 got onto a public page on Facebook, and wrote a little story that they were no contact with the family narcissist, which she was referring to me. And the person that runs that particular page, she's warned my daughter-in-law to be very careful, because the person she was trying to protect her children from would get to the kids when they got older and cause problems for them, which could not be further from the truth. I would never, ever want my grandchildren to grow up to be the kind of person who could do this. A little bit of background: it's not like I was a problem for children. I drove a school bus. I drove a school bus for 21 years. I was with children all the time. And so I certainly wasn't a problem, but I thought we had a good relationship. But 2011 on Christmas, we had one idea of what Christmas would be like, and my daughter-in-law and son had a totally different idea, and it didn't work. It kind of eliminated our younger son, who is not estranged, from the family celebration at Christmas. So instead of going to our son's house, he had his wife's family and sister or brother and sister-in-law and everybody, and our other son is single and he was alone, and he would have been spending Christmas by himself. So we went to his house. He lives about 400 miles from us. So we went to his house for Christmas. And when we came home, we did a celebration with our alienated son, and they were very cold to us. They treated us very rudely. And then they stopped allowing us to see the children. And we had no clue what was going on. We asked my husband met with our son, and he showed up with several pages of notes, complaints about me and things I had supposedly done over the previous 4 or 5 years. And it just went down the list, and it was stuff his wife had come up with. And, it was exaggerated, it was incorrect. We tried to reason with them. They were beyond reason. We had no idea what happened. And we just really felt like there was some influence because we'd always been close to our son. We never had any issues with him. And this all happened kind of out of the blue. We didn't expect it. We were just shocked. We were surprised. And our grandchildren were 4 years old and 2 at the time when they stopped speaking with us. And the last time we saw our grandson, my son told him to hug Grammy, and his response was yuck, and he refused to hug me. Same thing with my husband when he said hug Grandpa, and our grandson said yuck, and that was it. That was the last time we saw them. That was 10 years ago.
Oh, that is so heartbreaking. And again, it sounds like the same thing that with Jeff. It started as a misunderstanding, or a miscommunication that got completely blown out of proportion. And then there was hardness of the heart and bitterness, and it just rooted itself. And now it's been 10 years. Jeff, how long has it been since you've seen your grandchildren?
It's been 7 years. And Colleen, what I've shown other people is these diapers right here and these diapers right here. These are the diapers that I still keep for my grandchildren. And this little hat right here, this is Gideon's hat that he wore coming out of the hospital. One of the most precious texts I had ever received in the world came from my daughter just a couple of months ahead of time. Said, Dad, I always want you in Cruz and Gideon's lives, because if you're there, I know they're going to turn out okay. You're good for them. And it was one of those texts that, I just treasured. And 2 months later, this happened. So it's been heartbreaking, but for me, it's been 7 years.
Yeah, that is just devastating. And the bonding that you had, both of you had with your children. Now, I think when we go through things, as we go through the difficulties in life, it's a journey where it can either become a millstone around our neck to weigh us down and destroy us, or a stepping stone to the next place in our life. Not that we like it. It's just things will either destroy us, or we'll use them to become the people we were created to be. So in this adversity, Elaine, what is it that you've learned through this journey that you think could benefit some other people in our audience that are going through similar things?
Well, I think this situation is really about your adult child. It's not about you. It's not that you've done something wrong, because in most cases we haven't. It's just something that's going on with them, and something that they can't deal with. And I have also found out that the more you talk and try to defend yourself, the worse you make it, because your words are twisted, your intent is misinterpreted. And it just keeps getting worse. And I think you need to read and learn what to do and what not to do, because sometimes silence on your part is really to your benefit. And, I read everything you can find, and read stories of what people have been through and what they've done and how they've approached their children, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. Because your grandchildren are precious and you want to have them in your lives, but really the path to them is through your child. And if you can't get your child to speak to you, then it's a pretty good bet your grandchildren are not going to be allowed to speak to you either. And in fact, your children may take steps to turn their children against you, to make them afraid of you, or to make them dislike you, or to make them simply never want to see you. And that means you'll go through the rest of your life possibly not seeing those grandchildren, because your own child has manipulated them to be hateful people, which is really very sad that anybody would do that to their children. I just can't imagine being that cruel.
So, what I hear you saying, Elaine, is that it's important that those in our audience that are going through this remember that this isn't actually about them, and that it's about their child, and to have some empathy in the idea that whatever their child is going through, it's being projected in anger onto you, and separating you from your grandchildren, because they're using them as a tool or a weapon, in their arsenal to hurt, and that the people in the audience need to continue to educate themselves, about the realities of alienation, and really dig into finding ways to not sit inside themselves and be sucked into the emotional distress and pain and despair that happens. Is that a good summary of what you were saying?
It is, exactly. I think that's exactly what they need to do. And the other thing is to keep in mind that you and your spouse are a team, and an alienated child will do their level best to separate you. If there's one parent they like better than the other one, they're going to do everything they can to drive a wedge. So you need to be a team. You need to stand united and not allow them to choose one of you and say, well, I want to see dad, but I'm not going to see mom. You need to have a united front as well. And that's one of the things you really learn too when you get involved in support networks, that people will tell you, no, your strongest support network should be your spouse.
And Jeff, I'd like to throw this question out to you too. What's some advice that you would give members of our audience, that would help them to get through this too? What are some things you've learned?
Sure. The first thing is this: you're not alone. And when you think about this, you'd ask which books people read. Well, I was going back to the scripture, going back to Isaiah chapter 1, where God says, "Hear, O heavens, give ear. Children that I have brought up, they have rebelled against me." You know, think about the Gospel of John when it talks about Jesus. He came into the world did not receive him. He came to his own, and they did not receive him. So, when you think about this in that light, God is an alienated father, and we don't really talk about this. So, that was the thing what did God do wrong? God, our Father, has done nothing wrong. Now, you can look at any person, mother, father, you could say, maybe you're not perfect, maybe you did a lot of whatever, but if this happens to God the Father, the common assumption is you did something. It's kind of like we've taken the prodigal son story, and instead of there being a prodigal son, it's somehow the prodigal son is the hero son who deserved it, and the father or the mother, whomever, they deserve this somehow. And that's just not really scriptural. What I found as well, you mentioned, what can you tell other people? You're not going through this alone. But I will also tell you that by and large, you need to find people who understand this, because if you go to the churches almost always do not understand this. You try, no matter who you speak with, they do not understand it. I spoke with one person. He said, in my church, there are 23 sets of alienated grandparents. And, but the church doesn't know how to deal with this stuff. And the way the laws are written right now, it's as if somehow grandparents are bad, parents are good, even if parents are selfish, even if they're hurtful, even if they're using your grandchildren as weapons to get back at you or for whatever reason. So you're not alone. You can make it through. God himself was an alienated person, was an alienated father. And, to me, what I've done, Colleen, is I've said, I can't be silent over this, because when this first happened, I thought, the first thing is, I'm such a failure. What happened? What happened? I mean, you're devastated. Never expected this. And when it just turned out that I talked with Elaine Cobb, and she said, she talked to me about alienation. I had no idea what it was. And I decided at that point, if I'm going through it, I need to be a voice, not just for myself to learn about it, but because I hated the fact that I thought I was alone. And if you're a grandparent out there, if you're a parent out there, you're not alone. This does happen. It does not make you a failure or anything. Continue to pray, continue to hope, but and continue to have the love for your children. It's difficult balance line to walk, but that's the way that I've approached it, Colleen.
Yes, and I that really resonates with me about you saying that how God is an alienated father, and you're right. A lot of people, when they hear that somebody's an alienated parent or grandparent, they really do think it's because of something that person did or didn't do. And so I really like the reflectiveness of, well, what did God do? What did God do to deserve to be alienated from his children? Because his children completely turned their back on him. Um, you know, the Old Testament is filled with it, as is the New Testament. um, and so that really resonates with the idea of nothing. He did nothing, and did he deserve it? No, no, he does not. And so, and in fact, the alienation continues for him to this day, right, with his children. And so, I really appreciate you putting in that perspective for our audience to really think about and relate to, and as we as we look at the church, I know that I've heard that before, that there are times when people have gone to the church and the church just does not know what to do. And as a therapist myself, I can say that there's a lot of therapists that don't know what to do. So it's not that the church is all by itself, but it is an unusual situation that comes up that even catches professional mental health people off guard. And so it can be very difficult to wrap one's mind around. So thank you for sharing that with us. Jeff, I did want to ask you, what is something you would say is a definite don't do?
That's a good question, because I don't think that we know what those don't do's are. I think when you're going through it for the first time, you're walking the journey. I remember putting out a post on Facebook and I said, this is uncharted territory. I have no idea what to do, what not to do. Do you reach out? Because the way the system is set up today, often if you try to reach out, that could be considered some type of legal abuse, and you could find yourself in a lawsuit. It's absolutely crazy. I go to the church, and the church either doesn't want to be involved, or, I've been threatened, if you ever come back to this church, we will call the police on you. I'm like, well, wait a minute here. I'm coming as a person who's been to Bible college, been to seminary, been in missions, been very actively involved in things. I'm trying to tell you, I need your help. Could you please do something? And the church is like, well, wait a minute, we're not going to be involved. So what do you do? Or what don't you do? That's a good question, because I didn't know. What I saw is that from many people that I saw, it seemed like nothing was working. So I thought the best thing to do was to discuss it, because there's so much, Colleen, there's so much shame in this when you think about it. You're thinking like, I'm a failure. What did I do? And no matter what you do, you have to work through that barrier. Because what I found when I started to speak about it, Colleen, no matter where I was at, I started to expect that out of everybody that I spoke to, there would be other people that would be there saying, we've gone through this. We didn't know what it was. And I was thankful that Elaine told me, because I had no idea. And, so I don't know what not to do. I know what people sometimes tell you not to do because maybe it's embarrassing, but we have to approach things with truth and with love. And we've got to let other people know that they're not alone. This is a common happening, more and more so in our world today.
So what I hear you saying, Jeff, is that if you're in this situation, don't sit there quiet in the dark. That would be the don't. Do go out and speak and tell people, because the things that are brought into the light are healed. The things that stay in the dark fester and get worse. And that is, of course, where our enemy wants us to be anyways, right? Stuck in the dark, cold places. So, Elaine, is there anything that you want to add to the don't list or the absolute do list?
Well, I like the part about the don't list, don't sit there quietly, because you take your power back when you talk. And, if you're with a group of people and, people that you've known, not necessarily somebody you just met, but if you're with your friends, talk to them. You may find out that you're in your little group of friends, half of the people in there have an alienated child. Join a support group. These support groups are wonderful. There are many of them on Facebook, and you can pretty much figure out which ones are going to be good and which ones aren't. Make sure you join a support group that doesn't allow alienated children to be part of it, just parents, and tell your story. You'll find out you're not alone. People will support you. They will tell you that, it's not you. You're not a bad person. It will help build you up. So yeah, don't sit there and blame yourself, because in a lot of cases, unless it's severe abuse, you're not responsible. Your child has made this decision, not you. It's not your fault. So you shouldn't be sitting there beating yourself up and running yourself down for something you had no control over. But support groups are fabulous. And when we talk about the reading that I do, I actually have been involved in a support group for more than 9 years. And, consistently every day, I read hundreds and hundreds of stories of people telling their sad stories. And I think, well, mine is sad, but my gosh, some of the ones I read are so much worse.
So, again, the message is get out there, talk to other people, find your community, and tell the rest of everybody else. Do not let alienation be a secret. Just like, back in the day when domestic violence was kept a secret, and when women started talking out, things changed. So when grandparents start talking out and parents start talking out, things can change. I want to thank you both for joining us today and sharing your experiences and your wise, sage advice with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Colleen.
It is my pleasure. Thank you.
I also want to say to our audience, thank you for joining us tonight or today, whatever time zone you may be in. And we look forward to seeing you next time on Families Divided.
In next week's episode, Dr. Colleen Murray interviews Dr. Mark Roseman regarding his book, Preserving Family Ties.